Scottish Labour Party stand up against those cuts?
Well, I'll say two things on that question. First of all, there are cuts going on right now in the health service, in our local authorities. You've got teachers going to the local supermarket to buy pencils and paper. So to suggest that some of the SNP have efficiency savings and what Labour does is cuts is absolutely wrong. I reckon there's about £1.6 billion worth of cuts going on right now under the SNP. And
but why make it worse? On the second point, if you're right about that, why make it worse?
With due respect, I did say I had 2 points to make, and I'll make my second point now, which is that the Scottish economy has benefited from £37 billion investment in the Scottish banks to save them, which was something that Mr Salmon could never have dreamt of when we'd end up in an Iceland or Ireland situation if we're independent. Let's not forget that point. And the second issue about that is the Scottish budget over the 3 years of the spending review is about £100 billion. The Scottish budget will grow by over £1 billion over that period, including the need to tighten our belts here in Scotland to make sure that we do contribute to our share of what was £37 billion to save the Scottish banks and a £2 billion injection in the Scottish economy through VAT cuts, support for apprentices, support for pensioners as well. So I think people understand we've got to make a contribution to that.
Yeah, but what's confusing perhaps for people is that you're making that case, yet the Labour First Minister of Wales or the Democratic Unionist First Minister of Northern Ireland are fighting these cuts.
Well, what I'm recognising here in Scotland is that unlike Wales, unlike Northern Ireland, we have had £37 billion to save the Scottish banks, a much needed injection into those banks. We've had £2 billion through VAT cuts in Scotland, through support for pensioners and through support for apprentices. So
it's a price we have to pay.
I recognise that we have got a price to pay as a result of that. And I would argue that most Scots will understand that you can't get £39 billion injected into the Scottish economy without a degree of belt tightening across the finance of the UK and including Scotland, because that's how you'll rebalance the accounts of the UK government.
Andy Kerr, finance spokesman for the Labour Party at Holyrood, thanks very much indeed. Now, the First Minister, Alex Salmond, is in Washington now. Why shouldn't Scotland share the pain of belt-tightening UK-wide?
Well, I think it's not belt-tightening. What it is substantial cuts in public spending. Now, Andy Kerr just heard his interview and is hopelessly confused on the issue. We have efficiency savings at the present moment in Scotland. The difference is that these efficiency savings are reinvested in frontline services, either the health service or local government. What's being proposed by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, as is recognised in Wales and Northern Ireland as well as Scotland, is a straight whack, a cut in public spending precisely at a time when we need that public investment to revive the economy. And I would suggest that Andy Kerr, or more appropriately Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling, take a glance here across the water to America at the stimulus package being proposed by President Obama, which, far from cutting back on state expenditure throughout the United States, is increasing state expenditure, particularly in capital investment and other programmes, to help fight the recession. That's exactly the sort of medicine we need in the United Kingdom, not cuts, but investment.
Well, there is a reflationary package here too, but whilst you seem happy to accept the £37 billion bank rescue, the £2 billion extra in the Scottish economy through the tax cuts and extra benefits, if you're happy to take these gains, don't you have to share the pain too?
Well, can I just point out another confusion? I mean, when Northern Rock or Abbey National were rescued, I didn't go about saying that was of benefit to English taxpayers alone. I mean, if you take the Royal Bank, for example, about 20% of the Royal Bank is activity in Scotland. The other 80% is activity elsewhere. The £37 billion, incidentally, that Andy Kerr had just indicated actually involved the original recapitalisation of Lloyds as well. So it's nonsensical to argue that the recapitalisation of banks, which incidentally is money lent, not money invested or spent, it's money lent, is somehow an excuse or an alibi for a £500 million cut in the Scottish budget.
Well, you say cut, but yet the Scottish budget will continue to rise, will it not?
Well, at its lowest level for the period of devolution, and as Professor David Bell has indicated, we face the prospect, if these cuts go ahead, of the first real-term decline in Scottish public spending since the Thatcher years of the Tory government. And if that's the platform on which Andy Kerr, Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling want to stand on at the coming election contest, then so be it. But I think they'll get a profound raspberry from the Scottish electorate.
Well, you've got twice as much to spend as Donald Dewar had, and whatever you say, Alistair Darling's the Chancellor, and he says no ifs, no buts, these cuts will go ahead. Isn't it your responsibility then to get on and find the savings?
Well, firstly, your first point is a total ridiculous point. I mean, Scottish public spending, as you well know, has been increasing less quickly than public spending across the United Kingdom. Clearly, over the period of the last 10 years, there's been substantial increases in inflation, and nobody seriously accepts the point that somehow, because our budget now is greater than it was 10 years ago, then that's an excuse for public expenditure cuts of this magnitude. And finally, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is not the person to have the last say in this. That we've got electoral contests coming up, initially in the European elections and then in the general election. These matters will be decided by the people of Scotland, and I think they'll decide against the Labour Party and their agenda of cuts.
OK, but if it's not Labour and Downing Street, it's the Conservative
Scottish
Party.
public services, but even more importantly,